Thank you, everybody, for being here. And thank you, Professor Danielle Wilde, for accepting the invitation by CONEF, the Configuring Environment and Food project that it is run in the Department of History and Philosophy of Science here in the University of Athens. It is a great pleasure and honor to have Danielle Wilde with us. She is Associate Professor of Embodied Design at the University of Southern Denmark. Her work is at the interface of food studies and social sciences, user-centered design, and participatory design. And she specializes in, as I said, participatory design research, focus on social and ecological sustainability, a key topic for CONEF, and also her method enables diverse stakeholders to engage with wicked problems that cut across disciplines and cultures and develop new social practices and policy practices around technologies and science of food throughout a bottom-up approach. This is what I got from Daniel's website, and also from what I got from our session in the 4S meeting last August, when we first met there in a session that Daniel organized. And this is a topic that really is of interest, the engagement of stakeholders in the making of food policies and food practices. And this is right at the heart of CONEF, because CONEF has as a name the stakeholder empowerment and engagement by building the transition pathways informed by history, but also informed by social analysis of contemporary dynamics and contemporary social practices. So, Daniel, thank you so much for being here tonight with us. It's a great pleasure and honor. And the talk has the fascinating title, What If Everything Was Edible? So, Daniel, the floor is on you. Thank you so much once more.
Stathis, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here, and there's so much I want to speak about, and I'm not going to be able to. So I will speak about what I can. Just to add to Stathis's introduction, I run the Body Bio Soft Lab in Colling, and I can see something in front of, what is that? Let me get rid of that for you. I run the Body Bio Soft Lab in Colling, and there's a link on there to that talks about the work that we do. But essentially, what I'm interested in is foregrounding embodied ways of knowing throughout the design process. And when I talk about the design process, I see design as world making, and I see design as an activity that everyone is involved in. It's not just the purview of designers or design researchers, but it's the purview of anyone who has any engagement with materiality. And that means anyone who has a body, anyone who is living. And I see our embodied engagement with materiality as a multi-species concern. And so using this embodied engagement with materiality to negotiate and co-create our way towards new ways of imagining and living is the key driver behind the work that we're doing. And, you know, I have this core research interest on citizen participation, and I have a specific focus on citizens as drivers of positive change in the food system. Critically, though, I treat food as research subject, research object, as context for research, but also as biodesign material. So I'm going to talk about 3 projects and just briefly introduce a network that I've co-founded. So SHIT plays with the tangibility of food to disrupt practices and beliefs and open new ways of thinking through our transcorporeality, the porousness of the human body, our multiplicity. Food Plus takes a multi-species perspective on food and eating to question material decisions that designers make and to raise questions about who eats what and to democratize design. Rethinking Food positions food as subject, object, and context for critical engagement in societal structures. It asks, how can we empower ourselves to engage with international sustainability agendas and make transformational change in our everyday lives? And Feeding Food Futures asks, among other things, what we need to take care of if human-food interactions are to be sustainable from social, ecological, and multi-species perspectives. And just to be clear, when I talk about sustainability, I'm actually not interested in making things sustainable because I think we've made quite a mess of our world and sustaining it isn't good enough. I think we need to be acting in ways that are transformative and regenerative and can make moves to repair some of the damages that we've done and create space for new knowledges to come in and really invent new ways of being nature. I mean, we're part of nature. So how do we be nature otherwise in ways that are perhaps a little bit more evolved, in productive ways that are useful for all of nature? Anyway, all four of these things that I'll talk about put food in the hands of participants in different ways. So SHIT is the project that Stathis saw. It's an ongoing exploration of how to support people to engage with their gut microbiome. Our gut microbiome is the collection of microorganisms that live inside our gut. So the part of our body that goes from our mouth to our anus. And our gut has been called our second brain. It shapes not only our physical health, but our emotional and mental well-being. It shapes our cravings, our desires, our moods, and more. So we want a healthy gut microbiome. Unfortunately, not everyone has one. 11% of people worldwide suffer from irritable bowel syndrome. Others have Crohn's disease, inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis, and more. And these conditions impact quality of life. They take lives, they cost the health system, they impact families, friends, colleagues, even strangers. 20 to 25% of people on the planet will suffer from a chronic bowel condition at some time in their life. So it basically touches everyone. So to try to understand more about how to engage with our gut microbiome, Tao Ulenskold, who is my major collaborator on this project, he and I began an autoethnographic process. We wanted to use practice to work out what to do. So what you can see on the screen here is a consecutive series of images of what went into and came out of my body. I have 570 such images in all. This is just a small selection. And the reason for doing this is, well, because our gut is a black box system. Our only access really is what goes in and what comes out. Every person's gut microbiome is different. So medicine struggles to help us being people who have challenges with their gut. Technology also struggles to help us. Even when we put cameras where frankly cameras really shouldn't go, we can't see it all. So Tao and I wanted to understand if design can empower people to engage with their inner ecology, especially when they're ill. We want to tend our gut microbiome lovingly like a wild garden, treat this complex and unknowable ecosystem as our partner in life. And so in the research, we want to carefully interrogate where we as humans begin and end, what our material entanglements engender, and how we might literally, metaphorically, materially, and relationally grow some more fruitful alternatives. And frankly, the only way we can do this is through fantastic feats of the imagination. So I worked with some chefs and we modified chocolate cake recipes to be bacteria friendly, decentering the human in design, ensuring the foods that we humans were eating were full of inulin, which we know beneficial bacteria like to eat, that they had probiotics and prebiotics and polyphenols. The polyphenols are for the people, chocolate, strawberries, blueberries, green tea and wine, lots of yummy things. We held what I call a research lab in the wild, and a research lab in the wild conflates lab, field, studio, and showroom to expose early thinking to public scrutiny, challenge the researchers' assumptions, and expose underlying biases. And then we conducted 2 4-hour workshops with members of the Danish Colitis and Crohn's Foreningen. It's like a foundation, a patient support association. And we did the workshops with sick adults and healthy family members working together in pairs in the first workshop, and with young people who were all sick in the second workshop. And there were 4 45-minute activities in these workshops with a coffee break or lunch in between. So in these 4 activities, first we invited people to draw their gut, to use food-based paints, beetroot juice, turmeric, cacao, and spirulina, so you could smell it as well as paint with it. It was a gentle activity to get started, and also showed that we don't really know what we know until we try to bring it into the world in a concrete way. It also put these people in relation to what they know about the gut. And the results were quite fantastical. One of them commented that they see drawings of the anatomy so often, they spend so much of their time in doctors' offices and hospitals, and they didn't even realize that they didn't know it. So this takes an art approach to it. This is certainly the most accurate model of the gut, because this is done by a gastroenterologist who runs a department in a clinical hospital in Copenhagen. So we use this method of drawing your gut in interviews as well. This is another interview done with David Zilber. At the time he was the head of the fermentation lab at Noma, which is known as one of the best restaurants in the world. And we ask all of our participants, no matter who they are or the context they're participating in, which part of the gut you like best and which you like least and why. And in many regards, this is an absurd question. There is no correct answer. So it opens people up to begin to imagine. David likes his tongue and his anus the best. His tongue because of the tastes that it makes possible, and his anus because it lets him poo, and that makes space for more food. So for the second activity, people build the mechanics of their gut with simple found materials, and we split them into groups dealing with different parts of the gut, from the mouth to the stomach to the large intestine and the small intestine. And then in the second part of this activity, they stood up and performed for each other and watched the gut unfold from beginning to end. So this is speculating to see. Then after the lunch break, we invited our participants to model their feces out of cake and so-called superfoods, organic, locally sourced where possible. So the whole room smelled like chocolate. As you might imagine, this part of the workshop was a turning point because nobody does this. No one talks about their poo in these ways. But I find in my work that provocation can be useful if handled well. So in the second part of this activity, they used the Bristol stool chart, which is a common chart used by doctors all over the world in the Western medical context to help people talk about their poo. And they compared their poo cake with the Western scientific medical model. And what this task made visible is the radical complexity of what it is to be human. It let our participants talk about and in many cases discover the idiosyncrasies of their illness and the fact that everyone's poo is weird. It's not just them. It doesn't need to be a source of shame. It's just poo. It may not be pleasant, but the taboo of poo is something that's worth pushing through, pushing beyond. And then to our surprise, our participants asked if they could eat their poo cakes, and that gave rise to both laughter and disgust. So this was their idea, but my team are trained in safe food handling practices. We all have up-to-date certificates, so we knew it would be okay. We handle the food just in case people want to eat it. For the final session, we revisited the drawings, and people wanted to know who was sick and who was healthy. People ate their cakes. They talked about what happened. Reflection is extraordinarily important. And these series of activities supported that. They're doing things together, doing things alone together, eating together, reflecting together. The workshop let them deeply explore one of their most intimate acts and have conversations with family members and others about things that they've never before discussed. And in a recent survey 3 months out, the impact of the workshop was still holding. They're taking ownership of the method, conducting shitty cake workshops with their families and loved ones. And it turns out that all of it was valuable. The gentle drawing session was important to help them recognize what they knew and to warm them up for the next thing. And it brought them face to face with their relationship with anatomical knowledge. Building and performing their gut after that was funny, and it was informative, and it enabled them to begin to express how their illness manifests in their gut. The shitty cake session, which they all said they could not have done without the first or second sessions, let them deeply explore one of their most intimate acts and have conversations with their family member about things that they've never before discussed. And as I said, they ate their cakes. So for the next step, we're developing DIY kits and other experimental design methods in collaboration with nurses and chronically ill people. And these will be included in a clinical study that's being run at Vidor Hospital. It's very exciting to put this kind of radical experimental work into a clinical medical research setting. And it all came about because science and technology is failing these people, including however many of you in this room who are touched by struggles with your gut. Technology and science are failing all of us, and the scientists know this. So if we consider the kinds of methods that I use, as Judith Butler tells us, we must recognize that ethics requires us to risk ourselves precisely at moments of unknowingness, when what forms us diverges from what lies before us, when our willingness to become undone in relation to others actually constitutes our chance of becoming human. So the methods I develop are built to facilitate this kind of risk-taking, to provide a temporary space in which participants can become. The approaches confront desires, bodies, and dreams about technologies understood broadly. They affect displacement of desire and shame by naming things, by giving them form. And this process affords giving account from the place that Butler speaks of, the place where we become and remain human. We know we can feed our gut with prebiotics and probiotics. We've been doing this for millennia. We know it works. We can also use food as a material to think with, and this is what my research does. And this is what the SHIP project is doing, asking how food and SHIP might serve as vehicles for a participatory inquiry into the gut microbiome. This work doesn't sit in isolation. It builds on projects I've been doing with biology and food. So now I'd like to talk briefly about food and material practices. Food Plus takes a multi-species perspective on food and the act of eating, to question material decisions that designers make, to raise questions about who eats what, and to democratize design. My lab in Colling is described as a food and eating oriented living lab, but I think about food, as I said before, from a multi-species perspective. So we conduct these experiments from that perspective around food and eating. We collaborate with biology to redraw the connections between what we wear, what we eat, and what we grow. And the we here again points to our multiplicity and porousness. Humans don't begin and end with our skin. We're not held neatly inside our flesh. Bacteria in our gut die every 20 minutes, so it's a continual process of renewal in collaborations that extend far beyond any Western concept of the body. So in our lab, one of the things we think about is designing with biology. As part of that work, I'm a co-founder of the Nordic Baltic Biomedia Network. And in Colling, we hosted the third network symposium. It was a couple of years now, but it lets me speak about a number of things that we're doing in our research that I hope you'll find interesting. So the Biomedia Network brings together all of those people listed on the side, those centers, and it brings together scientists and researchers. And the symposium that I chaired was chaired together with researchers from Linnaeus University and Malmö University in Sweden. And it brought together all of these people, plus many, many more. It was open to the public for 3 days of conversations and 2 days of public outreach, of workshops and research presentations here in Colling. And I'll speak to this project now, but in particular, I want to speak to the work of my research apprentices. So, as I'm connected to a master's program, a research master's, and it's a 10 ECTS program. the professors propose research projects and the students choose who they want to work with. And so I'll focus a little bit on their work in this case. And one of the things they did was hold another research lab in the wild. They were cooking plastics, bioplastics in public, to try to understand what resonates with people. What are people drawn to? What are they concerned about with regard food and plastics and making alternatives? Would people eat edible cutlery, hyper-compostable cutlery? Would they ever make it at home? We developed recipes that we tested in these public settings, and in the workshops we shared the recipes as instruction sets within the Biomedia Network event, and we did that to test the instruction sets and to broaden the debate, to broaden how we were thinking about these acts, these collaborative acts of making. And the question that came up continually is, how do we move from this to something that works a bit better? Do we replicate spoons and forks, or do we need to understand what spoons and forks do? And from that point, explore more deeply the material possibilities. As we change our material practices, do we need to evolve our aesthetics as well? So how do we move from what you saw previously to this, or to this, which reframes waste as a resource, or to this? You know, but while these things are pretty and they're connected with current fashions around food, how do we bring the crafting of food-based materials into everyday practice? And what happens when we do? So these bowls that you can see at the front, for example, are made of gelatin-based bioplastic. With the front one has a herb called ramslö, and I don't know what the English word for it is, but it tastes like a cross between garlic and orange. The one on the right has chili in it, and the spoons are infused with dried orange peel, and these additions add both texture and taste. Now, gelatin is not vegetarian. It's currently considered a food byproduct or a waste product. But what does it mean to call something like that waste? We also explored agar-based bioplastics, which are vegetarian, but it was much trickier to get them to behave. And so the students preferred to work with something that worked for them better. And they preferred to use something that, from a broad ecological perspective, is not really very sustainable. So there's a lot of work to be done in this space. And I'm not suggesting that people will make their spoons at home, but there might be some crafty people who do. But I'm suggesting that these activities help us to think in new ways. So my students put together a modest book, a DIY guide for creating bioplastics. It's a design artifact, a report, an invitation, and a call to arms. You can find the PDF for it on my website. And it's written about in a conference publication that you can see cited at the bottom of the screen. And you'll notice that my students were the first authors. And they were the first authors because what I try to do is create spaces where they can step up and I can mentor them to take leadership roles within their research practices and practicing, and supporting them to publish and making them do the work that earns them those authorship positions becomes important within that. Okay, so now, right now, what we're doing in my lab is we're rethinking food and sustainability agendas. And Rethinking Food is a project that is ongoing right now, though it's drawing to its close. And this is the one that positions food as subject, object, and context for critical engagement in societal structures. It asks, how can we empower ourselves to engage with sustainability agendas and make transformational change, knowing that experience is situated and change must be too. So Rethinking Food is it's a 3-course inquiry into bottom-up food system transformation, and the aim is to empower citizens in sustainable change processes. So as I said, the project is ongoing, and this image is from a salon that we used to launch our preliminary studies at the beginning of this year. And what I'll talk about in the next few slides is the main part of the research that began in September. And when I say the main part, keep in mind that it's a 3-course inquiry. In essence, the research asks, how can we come together as communities, empower ourselves to engage in international sustainability agendas, and make transformational change? So methodologically, we position the work as extreme, co-creative citizen science, and I'll talk about what that lets us do. In terms of authorship and responsibility, we're examining the roles that people can and might play within sustainability discourses and agendas, and the tensions that push up against desires and responsibilities. Food practices are situated in the body, in the family, in the home, in social groups, in culture and tradition, and they're impacted by local conditions. So while the food system is global and transformation needs to be systemic, it also needs to resonate powerfully with situated everyday practices and the values that drive these practices. It needs to be coherent with available possibilities, able to fulfill deep-seated sociocultural as well as nutritional needs, which, as an Australian of British heritage living in Denmark with deep personal roots in France and Asia, I'm living proof that our cultural needs are never as straightforward as they might appear. So to anchor the research, we're using the World Wildlife Federation and CONEF's Future 50 Foods report to think about how households in Denmark can transform how they eat to be more sustainable. The report is usefully troubling. It's authored by world-leading food and sustainability experts, but it's financed and branded by CONEF and the WWF. And CONEF is known as an enormous multinational company making a lot of ready-made foods, and that troubles people. What else troubles them is that not all 50 foods are available everywhere, and they're not all sustainable where they are found. A common complaint is, well, why Japanese mushrooms are not the ones we can forage locally? What are bambara nuts? Why would eating foods from Africa or Asia or South America be more sustainable? I don't understand this, and people get quite emotional about it. So as I said, the study unfolds over 3 courses. The main course involves 35 families from Kolding, Denmark. Kolding has a population of 90,000 people. It's a small city with surrounding villages. And these families meet the researchers. They receive a box of 39 of the 50 foods purchased locally. They have a closed Facebook group where they share recipes and impressions. They have online cooking sessions, a Sunday market, and sustainability breakfasts. And they're actually part of dessert. The second course is free range, and it involves households from all over Denmark. We partnered with the Danish national broadcaster, DR, on this course to reach a broad audience. And the third course is dessert. And this course gives everyone a chance to shape the research outcomes. The different courses let us look at different things: the influence of children on sustainability choices, changes in experience and position from one geographic location to another, and the impact and possibilities of conducting food-based research online. Methodologically, we want to know what is needed to keep diverse people engaged with an extended participatory online study, and how do we conduct community-based analysis and peer review online and ensure all participants have a voice. We also hope to expand understanding of why so-called extreme approaches to citizen science may bring benefit. Obviously, we're not in an extreme location in Kolding, Denmark, but we want the citizens to play an important role in shaping what we do, not only during dessert, but throughout the study. So our study design is agile, so we can respond to insights as they arise. So for the main course, the participants are exchanging a lot of views on Facebook. And so we've started doing the Facebook analysis, and just as a first sense of what we're doing. So we have 35 participating families in this course. And we asked for families with children, families of any rainbow color, but with children. The majority of the participants are middle-class Danes, not all of them, but most of them. We would have liked a bit more diversity, but this is the primary demographic in Denmark, so it's okay. They were hand-delivered food boxes containing 39 of the 50 foods, the ones that we could source locally in season. And they have a closed Facebook group where they share recipes and impressions and a number of shared in-person and online activities. And I'll just touch on a couple of those. So in many regards, we're trying to do some mappings for Facebook. And in many regards, it's meaningless because self-selected participants self-report selected activities. At the same time, what we're finding is interesting. As in most research, our participants are trying to be good participants. A small number actively drive the community for their engagement, and many others lurk. Half of the dishes families are making sit outside of what could be considered Danish traditional eating habits. half are completely new dishes built around one or more of the ingredients that we provided. A third are familiar family favorites with one or more ingredients swapped out. And a third of the dishes used the foods that we provided as a side dish. So here you see some pictures that were put on Facebook as an image of a meal, and they're doing different things to engage with each other. They're giving instructions, they're encouraging each other, they're sharing recipes, and they're doing different things. And we're trying to be very hands-off, to be present, but to be as hands-off as possible, to be able to see what they do. But we're also not pretending that we're not there. We recently held a Sunday market, and the purpose of this was it served as a meeting platform for participants of the study to meet the researchers again, to chat about the project and to bring home some new food. So what you see in the front of the screen, the ube, is a purple yam. So we had to order purple yam in because the shop that normally carries it, they were out of stock. So we figured, well, we can still order it in because technically they normally have it. But it arrived after we did our deliveries. So so people could come and they could pick up leftover food. My students, I don't know how they count, but they counted in weird ways. And we had all phenomenal amounts of leftover odd ingredients that we then had the Sunday market that people came to, and we didn't know if people would come. But despite Corona, we actually found it easier to get them to show up in person than for online meetings. And we found this very curious. The space was big enough to allow people to engage in different ways. And you can see an image here. There were small areas in the building that our Maker Lab is in that we could have socially distanced interviews, and there were impromptu focus groups that popped up. We also had meetings for the families. The families arrived at half-hour intervals to also help them be able to be separate. So we interviewed 7 of the families about empowerment, both online and at the market, and we asked them to define empowerment, and they related it to responsibility for action and ability to initiate change, having knowledge, being part of a community, part of something greater. And the research project gave them this by letting them share pictures, thoughts, and questions within the Facebook group, as well as with families, friends, colleagues, etc., outside of the Facebook group. They felt empowered by their participation, both through cooking and sharing. They gained new insights from the ingredients themselves as they thought about and experimented with how to use them. They said it was a great learning process, learning how to cook with the ingredients and why they were identified as good for people and good for planet. Most people found it easy to learn and easy to contribute because of the sense of community generated through the Facebook group. Even the lurkers felt like they were contributing. They felt empowered and could imagine that their actions can lead to change. All of them could see high potential in the fresh ingredients if they were easier to access. And the parents were convinced that their children had a positive influence on their decision-making within this project, even if some of the children seemed uninterested in discussing sustainability in any way. Now, these are interim findings, and we're curious to see where they go from here. The free-range study is a little bit different. The households in the free-range study, they don't receive a food pack. There's an online written survey, a pictorial survey, and a closed Facebook group where they receive prompts from the research team to help stimulate their self-directed engagement. As I said at the beginning, we partnered with DR, the Danish national broadcaster, so we could reach a broad audience. So over 10 days, DR ran a complementary theme, every article linked to the research. So they provided expert interviews and interest stories, live chats with main course participants and the chef, a quiz about future foods and more. What's important is DR's website is the most visited website on any day in Denmark. So it has extraordinary traffic. And while not all of that traffic goes to the theme page, I haven't yet seen the stats from DR, but they seem very happy. And so I'm curious to see how many people actually visited. We'll be getting that next week. And what we have been trying to do is track what can keep people motivated in an extended online research study. We've known for years a pandemic is coming. A pandemic is well and truly here. It won't be the last one. How can we see what's happening to us, what's happening to our families and our communities, as an opportunity to explore our research methodologies, so that things like commensality, which is fellowship that arises from sitting and eating around a table, isn't lost at moments like these. That people who live alone, that when your children's grandparents live in another city on the other side of the country or in another country, that they're not lost, but we can take this opportunity that forces us to behave in other ways as a way, as researchers, to explore how can we find ways to nourish our what is important, to nourish what often typically comes through our cultural practices around food. How do we nourish ourselves and each other and gain that commensality, that fellowship around our mediated tables? Also, as researchers, how can we get to know our audience? How do participants form a sense of community when they don't know what they have in common? You know, my practice is participatory. It's critical speculative research through design. It's driven by experimental methods conducted with people in situ. Taking it online to a national audience of hundreds or thousands of people opens up as many opportunities as it does challenges. So there are many things that I could say about this. Another activity that we've had are the sustainability breakfasts. And so far we've had two. We've had the first one, which is where our participants get to talk to the researchers. The second one where they share tips and tricks. The third one this coming Saturday is about sustainable Christmas. And the fourth one is about New Year's resolutions. Now, this work is about culture change. It's not about behavior change. It's easy to change our behavior. Who hasn't made a New Year's resolution and kept it for a minute, an hour, a day, a week, maybe even a month? But who has been able to make the necessary shift in our values, in the values that drive our decision makings and actions to actually achieve culture change? That's what we need to understand how to do. So I spoke at the beginning about positioning the work as extreme co-creative citizen science, interrogating sustainability agendas through making, eating, sharing, community-based analysis and peer review. Hackley speaks about citizen science as having 4 levels: citizens as sensors, citizens as basic interpreters, where citizens participate in problem definition and data collection, and participatory science, where they are involved in problem definition, data collection and analysis. And my work tries to trouble this, to ask what happens when we bring participatory research through design methodologies that are critical and speculative, and we bring them into a fruitful and productive collision with extreme citizen science to make extreme co-creative citizen science. What does that make possible? How do we get people to engage in the critical actions of defining and determining what research is reported? If we are reporting research, our stakeholders must be involved in critically engaging with the claims that we are making before we make them. So we bring our interim outcomes to our citizens and try to understand how do we get them to engage in that process. So eating is personal, it's cultural, and it's political. It's a locally situated, globally impactful everyday activity. Our participants so far have been open-minded about transforming their eating behavior. They want to work out how to change. They're willing to compromise on taste and flavor for more sustainability, but time and cost exert very real pressures, and children's willingness to experiment can also be an issue. Rethinking Food is part of a larger research program that looks at food as a vital catalyst for societal transformation. In January, we start a 4-year EU project that turns Colling, along with 11 other European cities, into Food Futures Living Labs to see how we can design for tomorrow, for better tomorrows, today. We want to further our understanding of how to move from behavior change to culture change, using participatory approaches to research through design to enliven how we enact citizen science by moving, making, doing, eating, sharing, conducting community-based analysis and peer review. Now, for behavior change to become culture change, we need to imagine the change we want to see. We need to prototype it, think through experimentation, work out what's needed to support adoption, adaptation, scaling, to identify the new practices, the new policies, technologies, and relationships that we need if we want our extraordinary more than human world to flourish. We need to do these things quickly to engage people from all levels of society so that we can all start to be the change we urgently need to be before we even realize that we've done it. Positioning the work as citizen science helps with that, especially when what we're doing is disrupting what citizen science is and who citizens are and how we can start to engage with each other more deeply. So my work uses food for data collection, where you can eat the data to engage manifestly with the ephemeral nature of positioning. It uses food to activate the body as a site of sensation, to develop new imaginaries, relationships, and practices, and to question our material choices as designers, citizens, participants, and as multi-species events within nature. I strongly believe that all of us, in all of our multiplicity, can look at the material artifacts we use and ask, what if it was edible? What would be the methodological impact on design and use if we use edibility as a guiding criteria? If we ask what might eat it, how long would it take, and what are the transformations it would go through as it was broken down? Could these transformations be seen as attributes to be leveraged rather than inconveniences? Do we really need to make single-use water bottles fit for interplanetary space travel when they're being taken to the beach? What would it do to our relationships with nature if we acknowledged our multiplicity, our porousness, and our responsibility as part of nature, and constructed our world as if it mattered? Food is edible, perishable, compostable, and thus potentially more sustainable than many of the materials currently used in our practices. So I propose that designers, and I think of who a designer is very broadly, that all of us consider perishability as a positive attribute. If sustainability is taken seriously, we might appreciate materials that have shorter lifespans, that evolve over time, perhaps outside of the designer's control. And such more than human collaboration remains largely overlooked in design research. And I propose that it is a serious gap that deserves attention. To finish, I just want to draw your attention to the Feeding Food Futures Network. Feeding Food Futures is a network put together by a collective of researchers who are from different disciplines, different institutions, different countries, and different stages in our research careers. Amongst us, we cover food studies and HCI, games and computing, social innovation, and living with disability, embodied design, social and environmental flourishing. We're building a network, we're nourishing a fledgling research field, and we're building practice and theory. In that work, we use experimental ethnography to reorient embodied design methods towards food and develop custom interventions to create space for people to engage with challenging issues in new ways with, through, and around food. And I could talk a lot about what we're doing in there, but I want to open up the conversation. I want to open it up, and I also just want to add something about my positioning. So I engage locally and I engage regionally through things like the Biomedia Network. I engage in and a state-of-the-art network that I'm now part of. I engage internationally through the Feeding Food Futures group. I'm, with Food 2030 in Colling, which is the Fusili project, I'm leading the working group on living labs, Food Futures Living Labs, so that other cities around Europe can leverage the expertise. And we're working in the whole of municipality in Colling, bringing together everyone who eats across our municipality in very different ways. And if you want to know more about, I've put some websites, some links up there that you can look at. But I represent Denmark on the European Network for the Education of Environmental Citizenship. I am on the European Citizen Science Association working group for Agri-food systems. And I'm a visiting professor at the Estonian Academy of Art Doctoral School, and I supervise students in Cologne and in Hong Kong and in Melbourne and in Leuven in Belgium and in Finland and in many other places as part of what I consider to be my critical outreach work. So I want to open up the screen again, so I'll stop sharing if I can work out which, sorry, I have a couple of windows open. I need to work out how to stop sharing here. I stop sharing here. so we can open it up and I can see everybody again. And I'd like to open the floor to questions, and I'll happily talk about other things, and but I would like to hear from you. Stathis, you're mute.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Daniel. That was very innovative, very colorful, very engaging, and theoretically very intriguing. So we are ready to get questions, but let me, once the crowd is starting, let's say, thinking about what you provide us, let me start with the first question about theoretical, let's say, your theoretical debts. I mean, you mentioned Butler, but in relation to STS approaches and STS theories, I'm sure that you have a lot of debts in specific theories, because you mentioned also this research into the wild, the risk analysis, and all this. Can you say something more on that aspect of your work, or what is your influences? What are your influences in theoretical influences?
Yeah. I mean, it's important to understand that I'm a design researcher. So my home is in design. So my engagement with STS scholarship is as a design researcher. So in many regards, I'm an other who is othering coming into STS. And I value enormously the openness of STS that allows room for design researchers to come in and engage in the ways that we can. When I went to the 4S East conference in Barcelona, I was blown away, because I think I scared everyone in the room when it was my presentation, because I said, I've found my home. I've found my home. You are speaking about the things that are so critically important to me, and you're speaking about them from theoretical standpoints that resonate powerfully with me, but of which I was not necessarily aware. So obviously, Butler is important. A lot of what Haraway brings to the table is incredibly important. Stacey Alaimo, who talks about the porousness of humans, her work has become very important to what I'm doing, because she's opening up a lot of questions that again resonate powerfully with what I'm exploring through practice. There's a lot of new materialism that connects very powerfully to what I do. But I mean, my positioning really is as a design researcher. So I engage with environmental humanities a lot, because there's a lot that's happening in that space that's very dynamic at the moment. I mean, one of the more beautiful things I saw recently, and I can't remember who said it, but somewhere they characterized environmental humanities as a discipline that believes that what we are facing is a crisis of the imagination. And as a design researcher, what I have a commitment to is design as an act of world making that allows us to bring new social imaginaries into being. So when I talk about design, I'm generally not interested in designing things. That's not the kind of design that I do. I do the kind of design that creates space for people to imagine, that comes from a fundamental position of disruption. And if we go back to, Shklovsky, a Russian critical art theorist, he wrote in 1917, I think it was, that, the purpose of art is to turn things until they awaken. And that notion of turning things so that you can actually see them for what they are, rather than what you have defined them at and then stopped seeing them. And that idea, which is also taken up as the notion of making strange, that defamiliarization has become fundamental to the way that I work, and fundamental to what embodied approaches to design bring forward. There is scholarship around embodied interaction, and while that is interesting, that is not where my interest lies. I'm interested in how, as embodied beings, our engagement through the world, our thinking, it is an embodied process. It's not some intellectual thing that happens in our funny little brain in our head. It's an embodied process that is this ongoing negotiation with the world. And that is kind of fundamental. I noticed there was a question in the chat.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was very clarifying. I have many questions personally, but let's give the floor to the crowd. And
Beres, I believe.
there is a question, yes, by Beres Chanley, because we are also an international group. So yes, Beres is in the UK, in the University of Leeds. So Beres, the floor is on you. Yes. Actually,
thanks ever so much.
Beres is a food expert, and also he's an expert in the history and social studies of plant breeding and plants. So it's a world expert in intellectual property and management of knowledge in plant breeding. Beres, the floor on you.
You're far too kind, Stathis, far too kind. So first of all, just to say what a fantastic paper, and I really enjoyed the playfulness of what you're doing and the way in which you presented it. And if I can join in, I'd like to say it's good shit. I suppose I've got a couple of questions. So in a playful mode, I'll give you them both, and you can decide which one is more appealing or interesting to speak to. And one of them's rather more pointed than the other one. So the first one's about how you configure citizens. And my fear is that the thing that's behind the citizen science agenda is the legitimation crisis in science, but also in humanities. And what we're witnessing is just a push to re-legitimize the same elite practices of scientific work, research, and dissemination, but with bolt-on middle-class, repeat participant citizens added. So how do you deal with those kind of communal garden responses to most citizen science projects? The less pointed, possibly, and more off the top of my head question is this. So there's been a lot of talk about the limits of growth and the finite nature of growth and the finite nature of resources and the pretense of the possibility of unlimited growth. So it strikes me that a properly managed bioeconomy based on the kind of practical infinite state of the sun's potential energy could in fact provide us with unlimited growth, right? Plants in fact grow so problematically that we've had to create all of these IPR systems to try and extract the value from them by stopping them growing. So is there a fear that you're kind of playing into the hands of the capitalists, the growth orientated capitalists? And we'll just see a new front of growth opening up based on literal growth this time, as opposed to dead dinosaur bones.
If you don't mind, I'd like to take both questions. The first one is a fantastic question. I hate the term citizen science, but the space of citizen science has become very useful to me. The reason I hate the term citizen science is because I have a visceral objection to the term citizens, because it's exclusionary from the very start. So every time I say citizen science, I usually come in with all this stuff, but I've started presenting at citizen science conferences. And it's very, very interesting because, I mean, let's face it, what I do, it's not citizen science. I just do participatory research through design. But framing it as citizen science, when suddenly citizen science has become useful for Europe, and therefore there are a lot of funding mechanisms around citizen science, has done something very interesting. So I never even thought to frame my work as citizen science until I was asked to be a scientific advisor for a cross-faculty citizen science talent program. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. You know, I need the teaching points and it gives me this many teaching points. Great. Yep, no worries. I was told it's very hands-off. It's like super. So then I had to propose something. So I proposed something with food. And then the students chose who they worked with, and then they did all this great work, and that became Rethinking Food. And what happened is the head of the Citizen Science Network came to me and said, what your students are doing is extraordinary. I've never seen it in citizen science before. And that's because I really didn't know what citizen science was or how it's supposed to be done. I just did what I'm interested in doing. And he said, can we give you some money? We have some money left over. Can we give you some money? And I said, yeah, sure. What do you need from me? Can you just, we want you to extend this project. It's like, yeah, great, no worries, you know. And it's like, it will let me do a little bit of this. Awesome, fantastic. I can experiment and see what's going on here. And then he said, you know, we're inviting the head of the knowledge section of the National Broadcaster to come and talk to the students in the summer school. Would you like to pitch your idea to him? They partner with scientists on citizen science. And I said, sure. You know, so it's kind of I've become an accidental citizen scientist, if you like. But the reason I position it as extreme citizen science is because people have a problem with that term. But I position it as extreme co-creative citizen science because it disrupts the term that they have a problem with that someone else kind of owns and has established. And so, yes, there is a legitimation crisis, absolutely. But I believe that I can do something much more powerful from accidentally finding myself on the inside. And everyone in citizen science is suddenly so excited about my work, whereas I know many people that do a similar kind of work, but they're so excited about it because that's not what they normally do. So suddenly it makes it possible for me to, if you like, push my agenda, which is a multi-species agenda that engages with otherness in very pointed and extreme ways, if you like. It's like I foreground these things all the time and is always challenging what the citizen is. And, you know, the foods that we eat, they have a say in what research we put forward. And we find ways to engage with the materiality to try to understand what are the foods trying to tell us. We can't necessarily force them to do what we want to do. They go off or they grow or they sprout or they do all kinds of things that they don't behave the way an inert material does. So we challenge ourselves to listen to that and be in conversation with the non-human persons we're engaged with as well as things like, you know, tables and whatever. But, you know, it's not news to anyone that we know that trees talk to each other now. It's just that we weren't smart enough to be able to work that out before. We're not smarter than them. We just weren't smart enough in that way. You know, we know that the beautiful smell that you get with fresh cut grass is a chemical that's put out by grass to warn the other grass nearby that there's absolute disaster coming, that death is on its way, evil things are happening. You know, I love the smell of cut grass. Now that I know what it is, it's like, oh, we know that lettuce screams when it's cut and the other lettuces nearby scream too. So all of these things challenge our understanding, certainly of our exceptionalism, but also our understanding of who we are and where we begin and end and what our moral choices might be, and trouble all of those things in ways that are really useful. And, you know, so it lets us also trouble the notion of where citizens begin and end. And the reason I hate the word citizen is because it immediately excludes non-citizens. Aside from anything else it does, it excludes, as a foreigner in a country where I don't speak the language very well, and where the culture is such that I came from somewhere where that is more Asian than European in many regards, that it's easier to go out for dinner, lunch and breakfast 3 days a week, even if you're quite poor, than it is to not go out at all. Whereas in Denmark, it costs you a week wages to have lunch at a cafe. So it's not something that you can do lightly. And people don't gather and congregate in the ways that I'm used to. So there's an othering that happens immediately, that happens not only through the language, but through the cultural practices around food. I want to just pivot to your second question now, which is around the idea of the limits of growth, and are there any limits? And, you know, people are like, the planet is dying. It's like, no, it's not. The planet's fine. It's just not going to be very suitable for human habitation or the habitation of many other creatures that have gotten used to being here for much longer, unless we take some quite drastic steps. And I believe those steps are worth taking, because if humans can find a way to live in harmony with the rest of nature, then it will certainly be better for us. And I don't mean better for us in a self-serving sense. I mean better for us in that we will grow, in the sense that we will evolve. And we radically need to evolve. You know, at the moment, you know, there are people trying to go to other planets to destroy those, you know, in the same sense that we're doing a pretty good job at destroying these ones. But, you know, you said something about, you know, if we manage our bioeconomy, surely, and it's like, one of the things that I talk to my students about, so, you know, I teach into a design research master's. And one of the things I talk to them about is, you know, they're always talking about getting solutions, and design is about providing solutions. And I say, look, one of the best solutions that designers ever come up with is asbestos. Asbestos is a fantastic solution to some very specific problems in the building industry, brilliant solution. But 100 years after the first person died as the result of being exposed to asbestos, people are still dying from it. So please move away from solutions. Gain some humility and recognize that what you're doing is responding from the current position, the current knowledge that we have. As soon as you take another step, you might have some more knowledge that you can bring to that. And when you talk about something being solved or resolved and solutions, something in your brain tells you that it's finished now. You can move on to the next thing that you're going to solve. But that's not actually how the world works. Everything is fundamentally entangled. And I think of that when you say something like, if we manage the bioeconomy, terms like managing come from a similar sort of etymological basis, I suspect, as terms like solving or coming up with solutions. It's like managing. It's like, so you're going to manage it. How exactly are you going to do that? And what makes you think that your way of managing it is actually the best for everyone involved? It may or may not be the best for you, but does that mean that's what you should do? Maybe.
Oh, if I could just come back there to say, I wasn't suggesting that we would manage it well. I was thinking more that we'll get to another situation where the rhetoric will be about energy too cheap to meter, just like it was with nuclear.
But that's it. Yeah, I'm not suggesting that you're pushing this agenda that I'm speaking about, but I'm saying that kind of languaging, which is happening, is part of what's making visible what the problems are. It's helping to make visible the fact that we just have to manage the bioeconomy. It's like, really, you know, good luck with that. How have you done with managing other things? Seriously, how have you done with managing other things? And you will probably be managing them so that they work well for humans. But is that really the best for the ecosystem within which you find yourself? Perhaps in this case, yes. Perhaps in this case, no. It's the challenges that we have are far more nuanced and interesting than we are really equipped to deal with at a commercial scale. But if the researchers are coming in, and this is where we come back to STS, if the researchers are coming in and are problematizing these things, I believe that we can actually make the kinds of shifts. I said something about becoming the change you want to see before you even know you've done it. And the reason I said that is because if it's always, you know, we're going to do, you know, I almost have a missed calling. If it doesn't work out for me in academia, I know I can become an evangelical preacher. I need to find a God to believe in to do that, or a series of gods to believe in to do that. But my point is, I can get people enthused about many things, that anything that I'm passionate about. I can pretty much get people enthused about it just because of something that I'm able to do. Trump can also get people enthused about things. Being, you know, it's not necessarily a skill to be envied or emulated. But the reason I bring it up is because we can talk about the change we want to see, or we can engage with our humble everyday practices And we can trouble the simple decisions that we have at every moment. You know, it's like at a certain point, we had quite a bit of fresh food from Rethinking Food that wasn't able to be delivered because there was some, you know, some people, I don't know, they got stuck with one of the lockdowns or something. And so I had this fantastic food in my fridge. And I opened my fridge at one point and I looked at it and I thought, I really should make something. Oh. And I grabbed a pre-washed pack of spinach and I opened it up and I used that. So I have a whole lot of knowledge that I bring to my understanding of the repercussions of that decision making, but I still make those decisions. So I need to be okay about that, and I need to own that. And if I can own that and be okay about that, then I can make better decisions. And I can slowly but surely realize that my values have shifted sufficiently, that my behaviors have shifted, that my culture has shifted, and that the culture of those around me is impacted like that. And then suddenly I look back and realize, hey, I'm here. How did I get here? I don't know, but this is a better place in terms of my engagement as a human with my human nature, my natureness, my humanness, my entangledness with the world than where I was before. And that's kind of awesome. I got here without realizing, because I was attending to the small everyday practices and being kind to myself about the decisions that I'm making and working out, well, you know, plants grow in ways that are so problematic. Awesome. What do we do with that? Coronavirus is hell, and it's bringing so much sadness and difficulty to so many people. But what are the things that we can leverage out of this that might be able to be awesome? Such as, how do we do commensality from a distance? We couldn't have convinced people to do many of the things we're doing before, but we can now, because the choices and the context and the for our everyday practices has shifted so radically. And people are therefore able to consider things that they would never have considered before, because everything is disrupted. Therefore, they're able to entertain possibilities that they would never have entertained before. I don't know. I think that's all I have to say about that.
That was fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Boris. And we have one more question.
Everyone is frozen.
By Alexandros Vakoulas, PhD student and a research member of CONEF. So Alexandros, please activate your microphone and your camera to address the question. Yes.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. It was very, very enjoyable, I might say, personally. So I'm trying to wrap my head around all these multiple elements you have introduced. It's a really multifaceted research, and how am I to say it? I mean, but my personal opinion. So I would like to ask a question and help me get through it. So here goes. So it seems that by revisiting design practices and democratizing them through participatory procedures, we can create new modes of consumption, as it may be evident in the case of food, as you shown us. So you mentioned that this way, as material humans, much more than like citizens, maybe we can find the way to live harmoniously with our environment. And if I gather correctly, this may be a solution to many of the current environmental challenges we're facing. So if this all is the broad description of a transition pathway, how we can transition to more sustainable practices, maybe where and how would you see power coming as an element into this whole scene?
Thank you.
Thank
you. It's interesting that the idea that this is a transition practice, because in many regards it's what I position it as. However, what I want to point out is that what the work is doing and is not necessarily bringing us to clear pathways for transition. What it's doing in a way, I believe, is prompting a shift in the participants to enable them to understand that they can empower themselves, they can be empowered. And what was interesting, I'm not going to be able to remember the details, but when we looked to the literature for definitions of empowerment, and they had nothing to do with the kind of definitions that our participants brought to the table. So we went with the ones that the participants brought. They came from lay understandings of empowerment. And we just tried to understand what they were speaking about and speaking to. And ultimately what we're seeing is, in some regards, no matter what they're doing, whether they will continue to eat these foods or not, they seem to have taken what the project, the experimental activities have offered them and are running with it. And I think it's best exemplified by in the SHIT project, where after we did the workshops, people emailed me and said, would you mind sharing the recipes? We want to do shitty cake shop workshops with our families. And my first response was, heavens, how is that going to go? You know, do they understand how carefully we scaffolded everything? I wonder what it will be like. I wish I could be, you know, a fly on the wall in their houses. And my second response was to recognize that what they are doing is they're taking ownership of the participatory practices, the methodology that we are delivering to them, that we are the methodological framework, the participatory framework that we are creating for them to explore things. And that they take ownership of it, I think is very, very interesting. And so I believe that it leads to new modes of consumption, but I don't necessarily know what those new modes are. And I suspect that therein lies the power of the approach. Because we're not telling people what to do, we're saying, here's this international sustainability advice. It's created to work to work on all 5 continents. What is it like for you in Denmark, in your home, in your suburb or village or wherever you live? You know, what is it like for you? And then when people look at it from a situated perspective and take it seriously, because people want sustainability advice to help them make good decisions. But when they actually engage with it, it makes them angry. They feel unempowered because they're like, but what is this? Why is it like this? Why is it in English? Can't you, you know, this is just sloppy. Can't you make it in Danish? You know, they think we haven't thought about it. You know, it's like, no, we're trying to understand. Does it matter? And how does it matter? And what does it matter? You know, what do we do? Can't you change it? It's like, well, that's how the advice came. We are interested in how you engage with the device. So in many regards, they are interested in us providing them with the solutions and saying, do this. And that's what they're looking to the international advice for. Do this. Okay, great, we can do it. And then they're like, oh, but it doesn't work. I don't understand the language. I can't get the things. Why are we using Japanese mushrooms and not these? I don't know how to do this. And then they're expecting us as researchers who are bringing these opportunities for engagement to them to equally give them the answers. But none of my work does. All of my work problematizes their engagement and tries to understand what is needed to empower people to develop new practices themselves and to think about what the impact of those new practices might be and the entanglements of those new practices might be. And all of my work does that. And it does it in different ways. And every time people come thinking I'm going to give them an answer and I'm going to give them a solution, and that's awesome because I'm the expert and that's my job. And then when they realize that actually that's not what I'm going to do, sometimes there's a little bit of dismay. But nonetheless, because the things I do are so strange, it seduces people often in a delightful way that's very carefully structured. that they go, oh, well, I'm not going to get what I wanted. I might as well just do this. It's kind of fun, whatever. This is important. We're going to do it anyway. And through the process, they end up finding ways to feel empowered. And so sometimes it's because of my lack in comparison to what they're expecting, the difference between what they're expecting and what they get. That when they see it as a lack, that's what galvanizes them. But in other cases, it's just purely through engagement, through both delight and urgency. Something about an acknowledgement of the urgency, but also an acknowledgement of the fact that as humans, we all want love in our life. We all want to eat something delicious, even if we only, I used to work with a scientist who just wouldn't eat green things. He still wanted to eat something delicious. He just didn't want to eat green things. So we all have our own version of what that is. And that's also why food is incredibly useful, is because everyone has strong opinions about food. Even if their opinion is, yeah, it doesn't interest me, that's a strong opinion. We all have them. I don't know if that answers your question, but
definitely. May I have a quick follow-up, maybe to build on this? So, it's interesting. I find interesting what you said about them being kind of frustrated when they're not getting what they wanted to get when they are asking for the answers, basically. So, if we take a step back and see, we found ourselves in an age and in a situation with a pandemic that we have more experts than people on Earth at sometimes. So everyone has his opinion and her opinion, but at the same time, people seem to be addicted to design procedures that have a specific expert. So how could we see the role of the expert, both empowering and guiding, maybe towards some, I don't know, at least some peer-reviewed knowledge, if not something more? How could we see this as a part of?
Look, we need experts. Expertise is incredibly important. It's critically important. And you're absolutely right that we're in a situation where the need for expertise is a life and death need. It's very, very present to people, and people are dying, but I believe we also need what I call post-disciplinary practices and expertise, and that's the people who are able to, in agile ways, make connections across disciplinary boundaries and create spaces and open up questions about that. I'm going to put I have an article where I talk about design research education and global concerns is what it's called. It's on Sheiji, and I'll just put the title. It's it was published this year on Sheiji Journal of Design Economics and Innovation. But from that, you should be able to find it. But I talk about post-disciplinary practice, and I raise the question of what is the role of the designer, and I propose the role of the designer is actually as a kind of sustainability broker. That our job is not to tell people what to do. It's to provide opportunities for people to reflect deeply on the possibilities and the challenges and the opportunities, and to think in more deeply critical ways. And that again asks us, what is the role of the expert? Because what we see with regard to expertise is a lot of people hand over their own responsibility and decision making to these experts. And yet, as we see with something like the pandemic, actually even extraordinarily knowledgeable experts at different times just do not know what to do here. This is something new that we did not know anything about. And it it challenges the notion of expertise and the place of expertise. But I believe expertise is extraordinarily important. But I also believe that crossing disciplinary boundaries is fundamental, that expertise can't exist in isolation, despite the need for deep diving to gain that expertise. We also need to be able to facilitate radical post-disciplinarity.
Thank you so much. Any other questions from the audience for Danielle?
Can I just follow up with something? Then if someone has a question, just pop a note in the chat. But I just want to follow up and say, you know, I did some work a couple of years ago where I worked with year 8 students. So they're 13, 14 years old. And I took over their science class for a semester, or half of their science classes. They had 2 science classes and I took over one, and the other one was developed in complement to what I was doing. And what we did was biohack school science. So they would come to our Maker Lab for one of their science classes every week. And they spent half a day with us. And then the other half of the day was spent elsewhere in the university doing their second science class. And you know, they just had, both their science classes took place at the university, but half was run by their teachers and half was run by my team. And what we did is we taught them we introduced them to biohacking and taught them how to find open source instructions online to build biological equipment, to build their own biology lab. And we taught them design methods to be able to, design anthropology and ethnographic methods so they could look at their own everyday practices and work out what to do. And then the students, they made groups and then they came up with projects of what they wanted to do to biohack their everyday life to make it more sustainable. And repeatedly what we'd see is you'd see people, they'd come up and they'd say, oh, Danielle, can we do this? And I'd say, yeah, that sounds great. And they'd say, how do we do it? I'd say, well, I don't know, I have no idea. And then they'd look at me, and I was the most senior person in the room. I'm a professor, I was wearing a lab coat, I'm running the whole show, and I don't know. And it had some fantastic discussions with their teachers, and we're just about to write it up because we've been trying to get long-term impact as the children go through school to see if there are any longer-term repercussions. But we would watch them, they would sit in, you know, part of the Maker Lab, there'd be these two girls in particular were sitting there and just, you know, watching on their faces. There's absolute terror because we weren't telling them what to do. I guess said, I don't know, maybe you can look at this website, or this website might be a good place to start. And then we watched them, you know, frozen, unable to move forward, and then realizing that actually they could do this, they could go with this. And then realizing they could do it. And then in another example, just quickly, is a group of boys who, you know, 2 of them, I'm sure they were just smoking joints before they came in, and they sat with hoodies over their head and they never listened, they never spoke. And one of them was just really unruly and awful. And one of the teachers said, look, after the Easter break, we're going to take him out. We're not bringing him back in. And I said, okay. I said, it's up to you. I'm happy for him to be here. And then at the Easter break, he came back in, and I said, oh, what happened? And she said, well, we wrote to his parents and told him he had to be pulled out, and his mother wrote me back immediately. She said, please don't. This is the only time in his entire school career that he has come home from school and told us what he's been doing. And this is a person who, from my perspective as an educator, was basically catatonic, unless he was being awfully disruptive, like throwing things at girls and, you know, just terrible. But for him, it was transformative. So it was just very interesting to see their expectations on me as an educator and as an expert, and then what happened when I didn't deliver on that. And I think it was very interesting. I think it's Beres again. There's another question there.
Beres has another question. Yes, Beres, please.
I don't want to monopolize things, but I hope it follows on from what you were just saying. So I had a similar pedagogic experience teaching foundation year Chinese students who were doing a course to prepare them to go to university. And so we were really dealing with the nuts and bolts of what a university is, what you're doing here, what I'm doing here. And they just would not believe me. I mean, every time I tried to bounce the questions back to them, enable their learning, their research practice, they would bounce that straight back to me and demand that I expressed some authority, gave them some expertise. And what struck me, I suppose, was that maybe it's the university that's the problem, right? Maybe it's the way in which the university is marketing itself as a Russell Group university in China. And it sounds like what you're pushing towards is some kind of notion of distributed expertise and facilitating expertise in other constituencies and communities. It seems to me that universities have become monopolists on expertise in various different ways that they more actively or less actively pursue. And so I'm just curious in terms of your relationship to working in a university as a designer and your views on the institution within which you work, how that pushes or pulls against what you're trying to achieve in terms of expertise.
Yeah, I have a very unlikely academic pathway. I'm a high school dropout and I don't have an undergraduate degree. I was accepted on portfolio to the Royal College of Art in London, where I did my master's. And then based on that, I got to do a PhD. The rules were that you have to do a research master's, not a project-based master's. And I did a project-based master, but there was nowhere on the form where they asked the question. So I took a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. And so I got to do my PhD and I got a scholarship. I was very fortunate, and my doctorate received the Prime Minister's Award and I got the university medal. So it shows how the system for selecting people is highly flawed, and I was just able to find a way through. You know, I was lucky they didn't ask the question, so I didn't have to lie. So I felt fine. Not, I lied by omission, I guess, but it was their fault they didn't ask. So my first experience of tertiary education was at the Royal College of Art, and I was there in 2001. And for those who don't know, it's considered possibly the top design school in the world. It's in the top 5 all the time. I mean, there are reasons for this, and the reasons are not always anything to do with what's good or not good, but it just is what it is. And it was a very privileged position to be in. We were 11 students, and the year that I was in the subject I was in, and we had something like 20 tutors. Extraordinarily privileged situation. I went from there to do my PhD in an Australian university, where the model is, as some of you may know now, because it's all falling to pieces, is it's built around foreign students who pay a lot of money that keep the university afloat. And, you know, I was doing practice-based research, and before applying, I was given a tour of all the workshops. And when I got there, I was told, well, you don't have access to them. Undergrads have access. It's like, you know, I went from my first experience in tertiary education was this extraordinarily privileged situation, and then my second experience was just like a slap in the face with a wet fish. You know, it was like pretty amazing. And negotiating through that, you know, so as an educator, you know, I'm very, very fortunate in the position that I'm in, where I am in Colling, is that I get a lot of freedom. So most of my teaching is related to my research, and where it's not directly related to my research, it's related to my research concerns, like, you know, teaching design research methods. You know, I now teach writing for design researchers because I got sick of students landing in my office ready to do their thesis and being unable to write. You know, it's like, that doesn't help anyone. And I had to learn to write when I was doing my PhD. So I have an enormous amount of empathy of what it's like to do that. So I'm a very unconventional academic.
Makes you a great commentator, though.
Exactly. Anyway, and so it lets me see things from other people's perspectives in ways that people who've come through a more traditional academic pathway are less able to do so. You know, I also come from, you know, a family that was mostly on the wrong side of the tracks, and a single mum who happens to be a lesbian. You know, I'm like public housing and all of the, you know, all of the boxes that you want to tick if you want to, I don't know, whatever, but that are outside of the norms of the kind of middle class pathway of expected academic advancement. So when I think about the things that you're speaking about, and this, I love how you said facilitating expertise in other constituents. I'm extraordinarily aware of my privilege. I know that as a high school dropout, it was just some weird miracle that I got to go to the Royal College of Art, on the day when we were all lined up to, I get up, we're all in this long line, we sit down on the first day and they say, oh, where's your undergraduate certificate? I said, oh, I don't have one. And then someone walks from the other side of the room and says, hi, you must be Danielle. It's great you're here, welcome. And it's so these strange anomalies where I've managed to fall through the cracks to land on the right side of the equation have made it so that I want everyone to have the privilege that I've had. I want every single person growing up in that single parent household in the housing commission on the wrong side of town with all the, all the neighbors doing smack, to have the opportunity and privilege I have, and to understand that it's a privilege, to not forget that. My students who are there, who are designing things for buff white guys and have, and I tell them, there's no buff white guy in the room. What are you doing? What are you even thinking? Sure, buff white guys exist, but why are you designing for them? They're not here. As an exception, sure, because they're an exception. They're not. What are you doing? How do you connect your innate humanity with the privilege that you have to be here and fail radically and learn? You're not going to get kicked out for failing to achieve your experiment, only for failing to learn. And this is an incredibly privileged position. When you get a job, you can get fired. You're not going to get fired from here. It's really hard to get fired from university. I mean, let's face it, they don't make it easy for us to get rid of you, even if we wanted to, So have the courage to take the risks now while you can, so that you can learn the absolute most that you can, and you can build up resilience for risk taking, so that when you get out in the real world, you are practiced at taking risks in ways that feel resilient, and you can support others around you to take those risks as well, because you can demonstrate the resilience.
Danielle, sorry for interrupting you. We have one more question, but
excellent.
In what you mentioned now about resilience, I have personally a question. In securing the resilience, the resilience of food in our society, what I missed from your project and your agenda, research agenda, is the modes of production. I mean, where the farmers fit into this participatory design, why you haven't included, and if you have included, what's your experience in relation to this, to their role in the making of citizen science?
So there are. Thank you for the question. I have two projects underway that work directly with farmers. One of them is called the Soil Project, and it's in Tasmania, in Australia, largely being done from a distance. We're trying to work out, we've been trying to start this project for 3 years, and all the stakeholders are in place. And what they have that I think is interesting is, for 50 years, they've been using glyphosates in the soil and laughing at the farmers working with organic methods. And now the soil is pretty much destroyed in terms of its ability to support the growth of nourishing food. And they are going to the farmers who are using regenerative practices and also indigenous practices. And it's important to understand that a lot of the regenerative farming practices are not necessarily aligned with the indigenous practices that are better suited to situated ecologies. And they're turning to them and begging them for help. So I'm starting this project where we work with farmers and policymakers and multi-species eaters. And we do an engaged interrogation of what kind of futures they might imagine, thinking radically, because of course, you know, I become like the fool in the king's court. I can't do anything. All I can do is bring them together. And it doesn't do anything. I get them to imagine alternate futures, because if we can't imagine it, we can't get there. But then I go through a backcasting process. So I get them to imagine wildly, and then get the farmers and the other eaters and the policymakers to actually work together and say, well, we imagined this wild thing. What could we do right now to reorient ourselves towards that far more desirable, sustainable, engaged and resilient future than what we're doing right now? And in a way, they still don't take it seriously. They take it seriously as an exercise, because really, I mean, you know, we've just imagined this completely wild thing. You know, they don't know how to get there. It's not even feasible. 100 years in the future, so it's not connected. So it's not constrained by the technologies of today. It's not constrained to the adjacent possible. And then in that backcasting process, they come up with things, and then they prototype them and they try them out, and they begin to see what the resistances are and the tension points and the pushback and the opportunities. And then they start to think about scaling them. And they think, well, maybe, you know, it doesn't take much to give up a tiny little corner of land just to try out this idea. It's kind of a fun idea. It's kind of silly. And so that role of the court jester in a way is important, in that it gets people to take the process that I'm providing them with seriously enough that they do it despite the fact that it sounds ridiculous. That what's the use in imagining something 100 years in the future? And then they realize that they can transform their present. And so with the EU project that we're about to start with the Living Labs in 12 cities around Europe, the whole municipality in Colling. So Colling is 85% agricultural land, the Colling municipality. And I think it's 95% of the food that's grown in Colling is actually for animal feed. And the farmers know the other food is barley for beer making. So we have local beer, we have local honey, and we have local sausages. We have a lot of meat production here, and we're beginning to have algae, and there are 10,000 kinds of algae in Denmark that are known as delicious food. 4,000 of them are commercialized, and so there's a lot of action that's beginning to take place, even though Danish people don't know really how to eat algae. We discovered when giving out lots of seaweed in the Future 50 in the Rethinking Food project. And so these farmers, they're in a situation where they know, because a lot of it is around meat production. They know that in the long term, they're completely unsustainable, what they do. But they can't imagine anything else, because how can they transform it? Their livelihoods depend on them continuing to do what they do. So Colling has, so just out here, Paku, so we have two buildings for the university. The one that I'm in now is a triangle building, and just down the road is along what used to, it's called Pakuset, it's the freight house, a long thing along the edge of the wharf. Everything around that is agricultural chemicals coming into Colling. And the mayor is trying to move the city more towards the harbour and to phase out all of these. And the farmers are saying there's no way you can do that. And the mayor's trying to have them understand, look, people won't want to be eating the food that's made with those chemicals for much longer. It isn't sustainable, but he can't get them to listen to him. But the thing is, I can. So the press release has gone out, and it's got a lot of public visibility. I mean, it's a 12 million euro project, and you know it's the biggest EU project ever come into this region, and you know it's quite extraordinary. I mean, €1 million of it comes here, and that's, you know, really opens people's eyes. And because it's an EU project, and this perhaps comes back to the question of citizen science and why I'm even doing it. Because it's an EU project, it legitimizes what I'm doing. So it again lets me play the fool that gets these farmers who are kind of desperate. They're desperate to hold on what they have, desperate to change. They're desperate because there is no way they can imagine changing. And what I do helps them to imagine alternate futures. And from there, then different kinds of conversations can take place. And then we do backcasting and things like that. And that's like the citizen science, you know, it's because it's really championed at an EU level, that helps legitimize what I'm doing in ways that design is not legitimized, not design research. Design research is seen as such an outlier. But citizen science is not. So actually, I'm just doing participatory research through design. It's just that no one's ever heard of it, and they have heard of citizen science, and they'll support me and give me money and let me do what I do anyway. And let me do it in ways that reach people. Because, as you so rightly point out, the human food system contains many key elements, including production, including consumption, including, you know, delivery and sales and waste, where, you know, why on earth we call these things waste? It's like, you know, how can we reconfigure these? And so, I mean, I have students who've developed, started up an NGO called, oh, now I'm going to forget what it's called, but basically it's they're using dumpster diving as a way to prompt new kinds of conversations around waste. And a lot of companies around here are very interested in the kinds of conversations we're bringing forward because they don't know what to do. But the big companies are now coming to me and saying, you may not know, but we have a commitment to this and we're doing this. We're just not quite sure what to do yet. Perhaps we can join forces. So there's a lot of listening for it. You know, I mean, Denmark is, you know, one of the greenest countries in Europe, but that's only because we do some weird carbon offsetting. You know, we burn plastic to heat our houses. You know, I mean, come on. You know, it's like, it's just numbers game, it's maths. But the people on the ground actually want to eat differently. They want to make different choices. But it doesn't matter what you do. We know a plant-based diet is better because of the ways that we produce meat. But even if I'm the person that's most responsible for feeding my household, for doing the shopping and doing that, I only have a certain amount of time to do that in. When I go to the supermarket, it's still the same supermarket. The things are still in the same place. So we need a combination of the choices that we are afforded as citizens in society, be we citizens or actually just humans. But as citizens in society, there are certain choices we can make. And our choices are constrained by so many forces around us. Our choices, you know, my disappointment that the main course of Rethinking Food is full of middle-class Danes is tempered, because they are the largest demographic in Denmark, and if they make changes, they can really make changes that make other things possible for others of us in society who are really truly othered. They can change what the supermarket makes available by their choices, by spending their corner, by the choices that they make. So everybody has a part to play, and there are farmers who are making changes, who are happy to share what they're learning. And there are farmers that are so resistant to change, but they know that they're not going to survive for much longer, that their kids are not going to have a farm to inherit, that the systems are destroying the soil. And so I come at it through the conversation of soil. I come at it through the conversation of, wow, what crazy way do you think farming will be in 100 years' time? I come at it through engaging people's imaginaries in ways that empower them to radically expand their imaginaries. And we all know that social imaginaries are fundamental to change. When Kennedy said in 10 years we're going to go to the moon, Before he said it, no one ever thought that would be possible. When he said it, a whole country decided to take that on board and make radical changes. And, you know, they went to the moon. We can do extraordinary things if we can imagine it. And the trick as a design researcher is for me to put in place the circumstances where people imagine it themselves. Because it doesn't matter what I tell people. We've known, you know, Club of Rome report was in 1972. You know, it's 50 years later and we are still making a mess of things that we've known about for 50 or 60 years. It's not a science or technology problem. It's a problem with our socio-political values and what's driving our decision making. So I can tell people all kinds of things, it doesn't matter. But what I can do is I can create the circumstances through which they might imagine other things that we can then bring into being. And so that's what I do with farmers and with big food producing companies and with supermarket chains and with all of those people in the food system. And so Fusilli is a 4-year research project, and it's called Fusilli, which you may know is a form of pasta. People in Denmark don't seem to know that, so we had to rename the project because they don't understand. They're like, Fusilli, what are you talking about? So we called it Food 2030 in COLIG because it's funded through the EU Food 2030 program. It aligns with COLIG 2030, which is the branding they've put for their new sustainability agenda. It lets us once again scaffold onto things from power structures that people listen to. I mean, in Denmark, Danish people tend to be law-abiding citizens. If the government tells them to do something, they tend to do it. I mean, we're not so good at that in Australia. That's why they had to have this draconian lockdown. I know the Greek are not so good at that, but the Danes are very good at following. They're so good that when the government says we can relax now, you can take your masks off, they do not do any physical distancing, and then we have a problem because they just take it at literally the letter of the law. But the point that I'm making is, once again, Food 2030, it's an EU thing. People go, oh, they don't need me to be an authority. I trick them in the best possible way, like the court jester. I trick them into empowering themselves and understanding that they can do things here. If they can imagine it, they can do it, and there are ways. And I trick them into discovering that. Also, you know, I'm the foreigner, you know, what do I know? It's lovely. I've only realized recently that this is the role that I play, that it's the role of the fool.
Sorry for interrupting you. Just a quick follow-up. I love this let's say, approach of the importance of the change of our sociopolitical values. But what should be the role of political economy here? Because what is the role of scale in all this? I mean, how
because
scalable
it's
is the
situated.
transformation that you envisioned and imagine, and whether political economy is really important there, or you don't touch on that issue, just out of...
Well, I do. I mean, I work closely with the local municipality and with the Food 2030 project. With the Food 2030 project, I'm hoping to be better positioned to respond to the question of scale. Mm-hmm. So it's 12 cities across Europe. 3 of them have a population under 100,000. 3 of them between 100,000 and 500,000. 3 of them with a population between 500,000 and 1 million, and 3 of them are cities with over 1 million inhabitants. One very big one from the Ukraine, I think. I can't remember exactly. I can't remember all the cities. But what my job in that is I know how to do what I do where I do it, and I do it in many different locations, and I've, you know, done my research in Japan and Australia and North America and the UK and Denmark and the Netherlands and Germany, in many different places. So I understand the situated nature, and I understand the need to be responsive and agile. Scaling is an extraordinary challenge that we have, particularly because personal experience is situated, and the situated circumstances in which we find ourselves are quite unique, because it's the meeting between the individual and the other. One of the things that I do is called first person perspective research through design, which is acknowledge the first person perspective of the researcher as a member of the community within which they are designing, and taking on board the different political realities of what that means to be working with people from within the community. In some regards, it connects to participatory action research, but through using design or design research. But we have to be able to scale. So we have to be able to do both of these things, to acknowledge the situated nature of experience and the radical complexity and difference of, you know, you tell me lotus roots are sustainable, but to buy them in Denmark, they're shipped here from Thailand. How can that be sustainable? You know, I used to be able to grow this here. I can't grow it here anymore. So you tell me I should do this, it's good for my health, but the local environment is contaminated in this way, or we no longer have snow, or the fires were so horrific this year that the ground is not growing things in the same way. You know, all these different kind of pressures play out in different ways in different circumstances. Nonetheless, we must work out how to scale. How do we scale situated experience? How do we scale responses? And so part of my role as a work package leader on this project is I'm responsible for setting up the living labs and trying to understand those kind of questions. How do we, you know, in EU projects, they talk about technology readiness level, and there are 1 to 9 levels to be market ready. I talk about design readiness levels. At what level of design readiness does something need to be in order to be relocated to adopted by someone else and developed? How far does your prototyping need to go before you can relocate it and learn from what happened here and begin to look at it in its new context, its new circumstance? What design readiness level does it need to be at in terms of the full, you know, when we think of technologies as soft and hard, or social, and, you know, like things like these computers and things, you know, and the intermingling of them, you know, it's like, I know from working with technology for many, many years, I know that as soon as you choose a piece of technology, you radically limit the possibilities for moving forward. We need to make choices to be able to arrive at things that work well, but we need to also take on board that the longer you take to transfer something to another circumstances, the more robust something might be as a proposition, but the less agile it will be in terms of becoming something else. And so how can we get better at negotiating that process and understanding what the triggers are that help us know this is at a really good place to move elsewhere, because there's enough here for people to work with. There's not so much that it either just won't fit or whatever. And if we acknowledge that process, that need to engage with the notion of design readiness levels as a framework for helping us to know how to move and how to scale and how to adopt and adapt, then I think we'll be better placed to do those things and to sort of renegotiate what innovation is, in a way. You know, I mean, this word innovation gets bandied around just like citizenship and all these other things. You know, there's such problematic terms, but, you know, language has never been very, very good at what it has to do, but it's the best tool that we've got. So we do what we can with it. And so we can think about innovation as this kind of process of the negotiations between, you know, it's not a technology, whatever kind of technology it is, and then a person, and then a circumstance. It's like you have all of it. I've just put in a cost action bid for first person perspective research through design. And we designed our bid around 4 bodies of knowledge. And the first one is like the knowing body. And that's where you have your embodied experience that sits kind of within our embodied experience of the world. And this is about personal expression and creativity and health and wellness and disability and you know, all kinds of other abilities and things. And there's that's kind of one sort of body of knowledges. The second body of knowledges is about the crafting body, and that's about our engagement with materiality. And so this is literally coming together with materials, be it the natural world or the human made world or the other made world. And then the third one is about, so that's about multi-species entanglement as well. The third bodies of knowledges is about mediated. It's the mediated bodies of knowledges, keeping it plural. And that's about how we develop technologies. And as you know, as people increasingly speak about the 4th industrial revolution, they kind of forget, they overlook that when it was first spoken about, it's talking about the 4th industrial revolution is about physical, technological, and biological innovation. And people seem to forget the biological, and they think it's just about big data and drones and things. And it's like, hang on a minute. Something else is happening here and something else is emerging, and we need to pay attention to it. And so whatever those technologies are, be they physical, technological, or like numeric data, you know, language is such a terrible thing, or biological, they mediate our engagement with the world. And the 4th bodies of knowledges are the socio-political bodies of knowledges. They acknowledge that, you know, one is, you know, we look inwards, we look at things, we look through things, but all of this happens within the broader construct of the socio-cultural and socio-technological systems that we operate in that also constrain our choices, also shape what's possible, that we also need to position ourselves in relation to and sometimes push against. And so thinking in these different ways and in these different levels, and look at, and any project that you do will overlap probably all 4 of those. It's just that it may more strongly bring in expertise from here or here or here, or the peripheral people might be more interested in this or that, or the stakeholders might be more coming from this perspective, or you might be languaging it in this way because you're writing into this area. You know, like suddenly I find myself doing the SHIT project in a serious clinical study, you know, that will be written up in medical context. It's fantastic. You know, so these things, doing these things and acknowledging the importance of these things and the multiplicity and the different knowledges that are involved and the different ways that we engage with the world as embodied beings, help us to then think about how do we scale? To come back to your question, how do we do this? There is no answer, but there will be many, many responses. And I believe that this notion of design readiness level can be something that can empower people to engage with the need to respond to this issue.
Okay, thank you. That is excellent. We have a question by one of our undergraduate students. So we actually, he sent 2 questions, but I think that the first has been answered already. So I'm addressing the second one. And he writes, can we say that a part of this embodied engagement is a kind of bioart?
Yeah, sure. Never ask a yes or no question. My simple answer is yes. Yes. I mean, you know, it's the art of living, and we are biological. And we are increasingly more than biological. I mean, my glasses are made of plastic. You know, you can have metal glasses, whatever. People have implants. You know, we're increasingly hybrid. But just the act of living is bioart, seriously. And I it sounds like I'm being flippant about it, but I'm not. I mean, you know, I'm part of two networks that engage with bioart and bioartists. And while I position my work very strongly as design, it often plays out in contexts where other people might consider it to be art, or where it engages with questions around art, or it facilitates artistic expression within the unfolding or the emerging inquiry. So absolutely, and it can be an empowering choice to position it in that way.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question by Alexandros. Alexandra.
Thank you, and sorry that I'm taking more time to ask a third question. So returning to scalability, I was thinking a bit about what you said, that probably there's no specific solution to scalability, but it's sure that we have multiple responses. So I would like to, maybe we can take a bit advantage of your expertise in design and your experience. So could you see any innate characteristics to niches that come as responses that could, let's say, that could say to us that a niche can be disrupting, or at least it could influence the incumbent regime? Can we evaluate the viability of a response by design? I know it can sound a bit postmodernist, not taking account of the content, but I would be very much interested if there are, let's say, characteristics of a black box that we can help us see through it.
I mean, I think we can, and I think we do, and I don't think we do it without taking content into account. We do it by taking into account as much content as we have access to. I mean, in a way, that's what the SHIT project is about. It's like, ultimately it started because it's like, well, how do we engage with our multiplicity? How do we engage with the fact that we have billions of such a vast number, so vast a number that we can't even grasp it, of creatures that so infinitesimally small that we can't see them, inside our body, where even, you know, if we put cameras up there and down there, we still can't access them. You know, it's the ultimate black box, and it's the nature that we carry around with us everywhere. So it was kind of those things that prompted Tao and I to explore the SHIT project. And it was just by chance that we ended up working with the Colitis and Crohn's Foundation, and then in a way targeting people who have irritable bowel syndrome or other more serious gut disorders. But we're constantly trying to grapple, and I don't know if we'll ever get a satisfactory response, but other things are happening along the way that are certainly satisfactory, in the sense that they are so interesting that they prompt us to continue working. But, you know, it's like, I mean, I showed you a screen of pictures of my poo, you know, they're awful pictures, awful. But the process of getting to the point where I can, in an international forum, show a screen full of pictures of everything that went into and out of my body. I mean, I have a framework that makes it acceptable. There is a rigor to it. It wasn't edited. It was just, I start at this point and I need this many images to fill up the screen. There it is. That's what we've got. I can start at any point, but I happen to start there. That'll do. There it is. That's what's going on the screen. The process of constructing those images was very, very interesting, because at first it was embarrassing to take the photos. Then it was mundane to take the photos, and sometimes I'd forget, and sometimes I'd have to, you know, go back and take photos of food that I'd forgotten. I'd take photos of empty plates, or I'd, you know, because it just became so everyday. Then I had to show them to Tao, my colleague, and he showed me his. And it was like so embarrassing and so weird. And then I decided to show them, you know, in a presentation about the research. And it was so embarrassing and so weird. But now it's just mundane and it's normal. Do I get to know my gut better as a result of that? You know, one of the clear things that became visible through that project is it doesn't matter what you do, how you draw your gut, it won't make it clear if you're sick or ill. It doesn't matter what your poo looks like, it will be just as weird as everyone else's poo. And leaving aside questions of whether there are clear indications of blood present or something like that, everyone's poo is really, really weird, and you shouldn't feel weird about it because it just is. It doesn't matter what you do, it will not show, it will not let you know your gut microbiome in any definitive way. There is no fundamental truth where your gut microbiome is concerned. Everyone knows if I eat this, I get a funny tummy. Or if I eat this, oh, I get the runs, it goes straight through me. If I eat this, oh, if I eat too much of that, I get constipated. You know, it's like, oh, eat some psyllium husk, some fiber, non-soluble fiber, that'll get things moving. You know, there are certain things we know through experience, but we don't really know our gut. And despite research advancing, there are claims that they've characterized what a healthy gut is like, but it's the ultimate situated circumstance, what's going on in your gut. You can never really know it, but nonetheless, we can and do negotiate our relationship with our gut. Somehow, some way, just as any situation, we can negotiate. We negotiate through the unknowns. And sometimes the decisions we make fall really nicely. Sometimes the decisions we make don't fall so well. So we learn, and then we make another decision. And slowly over time, we, you know, need to increasingly disrupt what we're doing and defamiliarize so we can see it again, because we start deciding that, oh, I know this problem, I know how to do that, at which point you're no longer seeing what it is. So, you know, it's an ongoing process, and maybe if we knew all the answers, there wouldn't be any point to being alive anymore, you know, but there's extraordinary work that we have to do. So that work is challenging and beautiful, and the fact that it's challenging is part of what makes it beautiful, I think. And we just struggle on, just like we struggle on with using language.
Should I ask a quick follow-up or give way for the next? I'm sorry for interrupting.
Please, Alexander.
So a quick follow-up. So I think this project is wonderful because it tests the boundaries, let's say, of the academic way of discussing things. Let's say, let's put it plainly. But so does this put someone between a community and the academia as that someone who legitimizes the language used, let's say, by the community to express their problems, as talking about their feces being transported into an academic conference? Or is it a way to criticize maybe how academia are positioning themselves against problems that maybe they are not actually seeing materialities, actually facing the problems for what they are? So is it like basically bringing more reality to the academia, or taking the academia to the material world more?
I think it's a bit of, it does a bit of both, but ultimately it disrupts the real world. You know, that I go into this thing and have them model their feces out of chocolate cake, that the whole room just smells delicious like chocolate cake. It's so disruptive. but it allows something to happen that otherwise could not happen. At the same time, in my university, I mean, many people were so offended that I did that project. And then there was I don't know, there was some leadership event, and you know, I wasn't on the leadership team, so I wasn't there, but there was a poster of the SHIT project that was there. They had posters of the different research, and the keynote speaker called it out and said, that's the kind of work you need to be doing. And everyone just kind of stopped and looked, and then they started looking at what I was doing a little bit differently. It, you know, began to make them see other things. And now, of course, I got this massive EU funding, so that speaks to them in terms they understand, so they stop and listen. But it doesn't prevent me from continuing to be disruptive. What it does is it opens up their listening to the disruption I'm bringing forth. So maybe this cycles back again to the question of citizen science and the EU and working with the municipality and the notion of legitimacy. So the disruption that I bring was so disruptive in the Danish context, which is quite conservative. I mean, I'm in the humanities. I was hired into tech, but we had a restructure and I was put in the humanities. And in Denmark, there's a very clear separation between social science and humanities. And my work is far more social science than it is humanities. So it's, you know, I have colleagues that look at me like I'm from Mars. Fortunately, they're nice people and we get on really well. So it doesn't matter that they look at me like I'm from Mars. But this legitimacy is helping enormously, because you cannot disrupt fruitfully unless there is some kind of commonality or acceptance or recognition. If I am only the other, then it cannot fruitfully disrupt academia. But if I have these things that help to legitimize what I'm doing, then they recognize the legitimacy, and that helps open them up to what I'm bringing forward and helps open up their listening, because what I'm doing is very disruptive to you know, what is traditionally considered the way things are done in academia. It doesn't fit the mold, not by a long stretch. If it was in a design school, maybe, because, you know, design schools have been incorporated into universities, or in some countries sort of they're different institutions, but they're still seen as a kind of point of difference. But not really as legitimate research. We're struggling. Design research struggles the way the humanities and the social sciences did a long time ago. But there's something that has to be done about, and this perhaps returns me to the question of first person perspective research through design. For that to work, you have to be part of the community. You don't insert yourself in the community, do something and go away. You are part of the community. So I can't do first person perspective research through design in Barcelona because I don't live in Barcelona. I can work with colleagues in Barcelona who do it. And we can work together and work very closely, and I can be brought into communities, but I can't, you know, my first person perspective is as an outsider, not as a community member. I don't buy my coffee there, or, you know, have my favorite bread roll, or, you know, go to this shoe repairman, or only buy, you know, ice cream from this place or whatever. That's not me. So I can't do it there, but I can work with people who do. And bringing a first person perspective things, it affords something different. So while the role of the court jester, the clown, traditionally, is an important role that I can play, you also need to be accepted in order to have an impact. So if I, you know, before I got the EU funding, I would go to an organization. There's an organization that's a network for 1,500 design-based businesses, ranging from independent designers to giant multinational companies in the region. And I went to them and said, I would like to do something. They said, oh yeah, you know, sounds great. We really, funds are tight. We don't, things are hard. They wrote to me the other day and said, look, we're very excited by what you're doing, and we would like to invite you. We think our members would be very interested. My conversation hasn't changed. Their listening has changed, because suddenly it's legitimized by someone else. And that's what lets us do those negotiations. You need both.
Okay. I think with this, we have exhausted you, Daniel. We are already in 2 hours and a half. So this is not a seminar. This is a huge.
Can I say one thing before you close off? There's a person who put something in the chat. It's a more abstract question. Unfortunately, I have no mic to make the question directly. It's about the nature of receiving information instantly and not struggling to acquire it. For example, Googling something, which kind of dumbs down our curiosity and thus retain that kind of information for a short amount of time. Is it important to salvage some non-technological ways of learning things? Well, of course. I mean, our bodies aren't for the most part technological. And I mean, my position is that embodied ways of engaging with the world are fundamental to how we think, how we breathe, how we imagine, how we are entangled with and within nature. Absolutely. I mean, you know, I still do, you know, mathematical equations in my head whenever I can, because I have some, you know, vague idea that surely it's got to be good for my brain, you know. But it's not just, you know, our brain is not just in here. Our brain is this enormous thing that has, you know, 21 senses. It has a sense of direction and a sense of up and down, you know, whatever. It does all of these things, not just see, smell, taste, and touch. And our non-technological ways of learning things are done with it by engaging with the world through our bodies. So that's probably a lovely place to finish. So thank you for that question.
Daniel, that was really very innovative, very new for our audience and for all of us, and also for CONEF, very colorful and very engaging. Really, thank you. It was fantastic, and we look forward to hear more about this EU project and the result, the impact, because that is the importance for you. That is what really matters. So virtual claps from all of us, and I would like to thank you once more and to wish you the best for the next year, a healthy and safe next year. And also I would like to thank all the audience for being here.
Yes.
We are resuming next year with a new CONEF lecture on sustainability with another presenter. Thank you so much all. Thank you, Daniel. That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be able to share this work. And just as a side note, the postdoc who's starting work with me on the 1st of February is Greek.
Oh, excellent.
So, yep. So hopefully, I have never been to Greece, and I've always longed to. I almost made it a couple of times. So hopefully we will get to see each other in person sometime before too much time goes past. And in the meantime, take care and be well. And thank you
so much. Look forward to see you in Greece. Bye bye. Good night.
Bye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so
much. And everyone is welcome at my lab in Colling. Come and visit. One day we'll be able to do it again. Okay. See ya.
Bye bye.